Hello and welcome. Today we're drawing a human eye as realistically as possible. What you will need before we get started, you will need paper that is larger than usual. I am working on something like 19 by 24. You'll be able to tell the size of the paper by the size of my hand on the screen. You can see a lot more of my hand and arm, indicating that the paper is quite huge. The bigger the paper, the better for this exercise. The reason for that is when we sketch on a larger scale, we use completely different muscles in our hands, and those are the muscles that I want to exercise today. I am going to be working with colored pencils today. I highly recommend that you follow my steps exactly the first time around. Pick a lilac pencil, any kind of a lilac or a purple from any pencil brand, and start sketching a circle. As you watch the screen, notice how my hand is moving. This is a single smooth motion to create this circle. I'm not making lots of lines. I'm not trying to make corrections along the way. My hand is just moving in the circular motion. Imagine stirring a soup. That's the kind of motion I want for this. And what is this circle exactly? This is an actual eyeball. We're not starting with that almond shape that artists tend to start the drawing of the eye with. We're starting with the actual eyeball. So the outer circle is the eyeball itself, the middle circle is the iris, and the center circle is the pupil. It is essential to start with this large circle and not try to fit the almond shaped eyelid opening, because there's no way that you'll be able to make that look proportional and realistic without understanding where it goes and why the curves happen. So now that you have your eyeball sketched, now we can decide where to place the upper and the lower eyelid. And they will go somewhere like this. I am sketching a very neutral eye expression. The eye is just casually open. It's not rolled. It's not terrified. It's not excited. It's just a relaxed human eye so that we don't get confused by various proportions of facial expressions. So notice that I just generally sketched where the upper and the lower lid go. And now that upper lid fold falls naturally on the top of our eyeball. And if we had a wrinkle on the lower eyelid, it would go on the bottom of the eye. That's why it's so important to sketch the actual eyeball as an organ. Now, this entire composition is going to be an eye and an eyebrow. So immediately I'm starting to sketch in where the eyebrow will generally go. I'm sketching very lightly, very, very lightly. Don't worry, it will get darker. You will be able to see better, but I have to strike a nice balance between sketching lightly so that this comes out beautifully and using a pencil that's strong enough so that you guys can see it on the screen. So the purple that I chose is a nice, strong middle purple. I'm working with Prismacolors. If you are working on this with my colors, you may pick a purple that's lighter, an even lighter lilac, because you don't need to record this. You don't need this to be as obviously visible on the screen as I do. You'll be able to see the lines with a lighter pencil very easily on your paper in real life. But for the purposes of our lesson, I'm using a stronger purple. If you want to copy my steps exactly, you may use the same kind of a darkness of a purple. It's perfectly fine. Now, this eyelid, this bottom eyelid gave me a lot of grief. Notice that the first time that I placed it, it actually looks like it's a little bit too low, like the eyeball is actually going to fall out of it. So I'm going to correct it. And I'm correcting it by adding more and more lines, inching that line closer to where it needs to be. Obviously, it needs to cover the eyeball entirely. Otherwise, our eyeball will just roll out of the socket. So notice that I'm not erasing at this stage. I'm just building up more lines. That's the main thing that I want you guys to practice on this lesson, is build up shapes with pigment. Don't try to correct things. And because we're working on a larger scale, I want to see more fluid movement of the hand. Now, obviously, you guys aren't making recordings of your practice pages, of your sketches and sending those in, but As an artist, I am able to tell the movement of the hand that was used to create certain effects. So you can't fool me. I will be able to see if you moved fluidly or if you were holding your pencil too close to the tip and obsessing over the details. And that leads us to our main tip for how to loosen up your hand. Hold your pencil as far back as possible for things that are more fluid. Now, for things that are tinier and have more details, for instance, right now, you see that I'm switching to little highlights on the eye, and immediately my fingers slipped forward towards the tip of the pencil. And as I switch back to my broader lines, my hand naturally slips further back on the pencil. So that's something that you need to keep in mind as you're sketching. You need to keep track of it. Always notice where your hand is on the pencil. I keep adjusting that lower eyelid. It's way too low. It needs to be higher. I intentionally keep all of these little mess ups in my recording so that you guys can see that the process of sketching is not flawless. Sometimes things don't come out perfectly the first time. Sometimes you don't see that you placed something not ideally until you actually create it. So we correct and we correct and we correct. So for the purposes of our sketching, for now, no erasers. I will show you how to use an eraser on this in a few minutes, but for now, correct with more pigment. Don't worry about it being too hairy, too messy. I would rather see more work done on this than minimal work than just a line for the top lid, a line for the bottom lid, and a line for the circle. No, I want to see a lot of adjustments. I want to see a lot of fluidity and a lot of shading. So how do we hide the lines that we don't want? We hide them with shading. I moved this eyelid quite a bit from the original placement, but it's okay because we're going to have so much shading on this that this shading is going to hide all the imperfections. The final outcome of this type of sketching is going to be a light and shadow and a sfumato effect. That's what we're going for. In other words, this is going to be a sketch that will show no clean outlines. It will look fuzzy. It will look realistic. It will look more like an oil painting or a photograph than a pencil sketch. And speaking of that eraser, should you need to use an eraser, I highly recommend that you use a kneaded eraser instead of a regular rubber eraser. I'm not actually using it to take pigment away per se. I am using it to blend the pigment a little bit smoother and to lighten it down a little bit. And so that comes across a lot more naturally than those rough and jagged eraser lines that you will get with a rubber eraser. I never use a rubber eraser. I only have kneaded erasers in my studio, and they're very nice for shaping. So right here, I just kind of smoothed everything out a little bit, and that's something that you can do. This way, my line is now moved up exactly where I want it. And that shading is still there, but it's a lot less invasive. My eye doesn't look like it was punched and it's black and blue. There's just a nice soft shadow underneath it. So that little trick with an eraser is something that you can do if it's necessary. This is the only time that I'll be using an eraser on this composition, but I wanted to bring it in just to show you that it's an option. Now we continue building up. The shape is already there. We have a good shape of the lids, the pupil and the iris are in the right place. Everything looks proportional. Now we continue with shading because we're working with light and shadow only on this. What is an eye on the human face? It's merely a relief. We have areas of the skin that are further in, that are wrinkled. We have areas of the skin that are protruding, that are closer to the viewer. There are folds and wrinkles. There are texture variations. The eyeball itself is made out of a different material. We'll have other textures with, of course, eyelashes and the eyelid hair follicles. So there's a lot going on here in terms of relief and texture. And that is exactly what we're depicting. I always say that you should treat your drawing as if you're drawing a sculpture. Stop thinking about colors. think about relief and texture. Imagine that this was a marble statue and that's what you're drawing. Everything is the same color for the purposes of our sketching and drawing, but we are going to discriminate between the different textures. So the skin will come out a little bit different from how the eyeball itself will come out, because the eyeball is shiny and glistening. The main thing to keep in mind here is to constantly move your hand around the page and to adjust to the angles of your shading. Notice that I don't move my page around. My page is actually pinned. You can see the little tape pieces on the top left and the top right there. I have my reclining drawing board and I have my giant paper taped to it so that it doesn't move. I move around my sketch. For freehand drawing, it's extremely important that you move around your art, not the other way around. For coloring, it's okay to move your page around, because the artwork is already there. It's not going to change. If you need to color in an enclosed area in solid yellow, it doesn't matter which way the page is turned. But when we're creating compositions from scratch, you will lose track of perspective, you will lose track of balance, you will lose track of proportion if you move your page around. So don't do it. Keep your page static and pinned. You move around. And that may be uncomfortable for some, especially if you're working on a small scale. That's why working on a larger scale is such a great exercise. Get a drawing board. Make sure you have a large enough drawing board. Make sure it has an incline. And if you have to, draw actually standing up. I highly recommend that you practice that. Draw either standing up or have like a bar stool that you can adjust the height of and that you can spin around in. You need to be very fluid around your art. It's a huge part of how it comes out. All of this smooth shading, all of this realistic shading, all of this perfect proportion that I'm able to achieve in my art is hugely a result of how I physically approach my page. So don't get all stuck in that one little position with your nose buried in your page, holding your pencil close to the tip, drawing on a small scale. That's not how you improve. Loosen up, stand up, work on a larger page, loosen up that shading technique. Our hand naturally shades in these bowed patterns, because if you move your hand left to right, it naturally creates an arc. So we shade not in straight lines, but in arcs. When you have such arcs like the top of the lid right here, we naturally create that beautiful stroke. And that's also how we control certain areas of the illustration. Notice that I'm taking care of everything at once. I'm not just completing the eye and then adding the eyebrow. I decided that the whole composition is the eye and the eyebrow. So the eye and the eyebrow is what I draw from the start all together. So this is my first layer with the lilac pencil. And with this lilac pencil, I will add everything that's necessary for my base layer to show me where the light and shadow on this entire area of the human face is. This kind of a shading technique is different, and it's for covering larger areas and with little pressure. Notice what's happening right now. I'm holding my pencil midway, even higher than midway, and I'm just tapping on it with my index finger. This way, I can't physically apply a lot of pressure. So if you need a very fast, very light shading on a certain area, try this. It's amazing. You don't even think about it. It happens mechanically. Of course, you need to make sure that your pencil is long enough for this to work. And you need to make sure that you have a nice incline. My pencil is almost horizontal. And this is in real time, you guys. This isn't sped up. This is actually the speed with which I'm sketching. This entire sketch of the eye and the eyebrow took me a little bit less than an hour. And that's what you should shoot for. On some things, I say take as long as you need. If you work fast, that's great. If you work slow, that's great. If you need to spend hours and days working out some details, that's great. Not in this case. This is a very specific exercise. We're training our muscles on how to loosen up and how to shade so that we can sculpt these areas of the human face. So speed here is essential. You don't want to be too slow. You don't want to be too fast. If you're too slow, you lose control. You actually fixate on the details and everything comes across a little bit shaky. Plus, this is a sketch. This isn't a hyper-realistic drawing. Don't invest 6 hours into this. I would rather see 20 of these eyes by the end of the month that you've done, or 30 or 40, because each of them took an hour, then see one perfect one that you spend all of your time on to work out the details. So if something like this takes you more than an hour, you're fussing over it too much and you're not shading quickly enough. If it takes you 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you're not paying enough attention to shading. You're going too fast. There's no way that you can achieve this effect in less than an hour. Well, maybe 45 minutes to an hour is okay. An hour to an hour and a half is okay. It doesn't have to be exact, because obviously I don't know your exact scale or your exact paper. And of course, the obvious question is, how do we know where to place light and shadow? And what am I going to say? Reference photography, of course. First time around, you may just follow my steps exactly, but I expect you guys to do a lot of these eye sketches on your own. And for that, please find reference photography. A single close-up of a human eye is probably one of the most common images found online. So if you go to Google Images and you just search for human eye or eye photography or eye close-up, you will see millions and billions of beautiful photographs of eyes, and most of them look like this. Most of them are in a neutral state. How do you pick the one that you want? Actually, it's going to be quite overwhelming. When you have that many options, you may get sucked into the rabbit hole of which one do I pick? Do I pick the blue one? Do I pick the brown one? Is this one fuzzy enough on the eyelashes? Is this eyebrow interesting enough to me? Don't sweat the details so much. Just arbitrarily pick 3 or 4 that you like and print them out or put them up on your screen. A nice trick for using reference photography for sketching and not for copying them exactly is to flip your image to black and white, or to find black and white imagery to begin with. Because if you're dealing just with a grayscale image, a black and white image, then you'll be able to see it in your mind only in light and shadow. You won't be distracted by all the colors. So using your reference image, place your shadows where they need to be. And on that note, when you pick reference photography for something like this, for this exercise of learning how to sketch a human eye, please pick something to begin with. Pick something that's in neutral lighting. Don't go for dramatic lighting. Don't go for anything super theatrical and unusual. Just basic normal daylight lighting, no dramatic shadows, something like what's shaping up on the screen right now. Notice how much time I'm spending on this lilac and how I'm starting to diffuse all of the outlines. Obviously, we had some basic outlines in the beginning when I placed the top and the bottom eyelid and when I drew the circles of the iris and the pupil and started to put in the eyelashes, but as I'm progressing, as I'm adding more and more of this shading, I'm actually diffusing the lines. There are no clean lines anymore. They're just pools of higher pigment concentrations and areas of less pigment concentration on the page. That's what I want to see. I want to see pools of pigment, not lines. So keep building up that layer. I'm not changing my pressure at all. I'm just adding more and more pigment with layers. And that looks really nice. That's the point where I want you to get with your lilac. It's a very ghostly image of a human eye. We have some suggestions of shadows. Notice that it's a little bit sketchy. I didn't go for like super realistic transitions of shadows. No, you can clearly see that this is done with a pencil. It's a little bit on the rough side around the edges. Doesn't matter. What matters is we have these areas that are darker and these areas that are lighter, and all together from a distance, it looks like a human eye. But this is just the underpainting. Now we come in with a dark brown. Any kind of a dark brown at all. As long as it's either on the reddish side or a neutral side. We don't want a brown that's yellowish. Some browns are very heavy on the yellow side. We don't want that for this because it will clash with the purple. So things that are more like terracotta brown or just your very basic plain, wood brown, that's fine. But if it's heavy on the yellow, it's going to look a little bit ashy going over our lilac. So if you are following my steps exactly, which I highly recommend because this is going to turn out to be a super cool effect, go with a really, really deep dark brown that is kind of terracotta-ish. Again, not going to tell you specific colors because there's no point. I want you to be able to create these effects with any brand of colored pencils and make your own decisions on how light or dark they are. Notice that with this brown pencil, I'm holding my pencil a lot closer to the tip because I'm not doing rough shading anymore. I'm not doing broad strokes. I'm working out details. At this point, I'm basically tracing what I've already created with my purple sketching. And now I'm fine-tuning the details. So now it's okay to hold your pencil close. Now it's okay to keep it very sharp because we're working on details. The pupil is especially important to get perfectly right. The rest of this has leeway. There's fluidity. There's room for imperfection. There's room for ambiguity, not on the pupil. The pupil has to be a perfect circle. So do spend some time on it. And it's going to be solid black. So for now, we're just going to shade it in solidly with whatever color we're working with. In this case, it's dark brown. And now I'm just going to continue shading with this brown, going over everything that's lilac, but building up my shadows now with a lot more attention to detail, but making sure that I don't leave any clean and solid outlines, that everything is diffused, everything is in that sfumato effect that I was looking for. On the eyebrow, I can now concentrate on the individual hair follicles. This is the perfect stage of our drawing for this particular effect, and I'm not going to sweat the details on this. The important thing is to make sure that the direction of your strokes matches the direction of the hair follicles. Darkness is a lot more important here than texture. No one really looks that closely at eyebrows. We just kind of accept them as these dark shapes above our eyes that show expression. Make sure that you understand the expression on your reference image. Is it neutral? Is it excited? Is it scared? Is it angry? All of those emotions are conveyed very simply by the placement of the eyebrow. Obviously, if the eyebrows are all low and kneaded and very close to the bridge of the nose, very low to that upper eyelid, then the expression comes out looking either strained or very concentrated or just angry. So if you see that happening, if you notice that your eye just looks kind of angry, look at the eyebrow first, because the eye itself doesn't express emotion. It can only show you how widely it's open. What expresses emotion is that eyebrow. If the eyebrow is too high, if it's raised too high above the upper eyelid, then the expression will come out as surprised or shocked or in disbelief or happy. We raise our eyebrows when we smile. We raise our eyebrows when we laugh. But if the eye is squinty, sometimes that can be a positive emotion or a negative emotion as well. So if you look at your creation and all of a sudden you see emotion coming through and it's not the type of emotion that you wanted, check the eyebrow above all. And for the eyelashes, notice that I did not draw in the eyelashes one by one. I am adding eyelash texture, but I'm making sure that they're all coming out slightly differently. They vary in direction. Some go to the left, some go to the right. Overall, they're more or less the same length, but I'm freehanding them. I'm not fixating on individual eyelashes, nor am I adding them with a black pencil separately. Everything is done in the same tone of brown. And the most important thing here is that the base of the eyelashes, that area where the actual follicles are initiating, that entire area is just a pool of darkness. There is no clear transition from where the eyelid starts and the eyeball begins. It's just a very fine shadow, and out of that shadow the eyelashes are growing. Now on the bottom eyelid we can add a little bit more detail with the eyelashes because there are fewer of them, so individual ones will be visible if they even exist on your reference photo. On my reference photo they're clearly visible. Some people have very finely defined bottom eyelid eyelashes and some people don't. Some people have few of them and they're barely visible, and some people have these luscious lashes all over the place. So again, depending on what you're working with on your actual model. Make sure that the shadows on the eyeball, on the whites of the eye, are as heavy as the shadows on the skin. One of the biggest mistakes that illustrators make is not adding enough shadows to the whites of the eye, because our brain tricks us into thinking, oh, it's white, therefore we need to leave it the white of the paper. And that comes across as a painted ancient Egyptian eye. That's not the look that we want. We want this to be smooth and painterly and sfumato. So take that shadow seriously. Just treat it as an object. Don't think of it in terms of this is a human eye, this is the white of the eye, this is the colorful part of the eye. No, it's a sphere and it has shadows that fall upon it. So treat those shadows as you would with any other object of any other texture and color. Now, this part is truly magical. If you're working with the same colors as I am, and if you're working with Prismacolor pencils, bring in a light blender right now. Or if you're working with any other brand that allows blenders. I am bringing in a 20% French gray, and this French gray is going to do magic on my sketch. This is truly going to create the sfumato effect that I wanted. And what it's doing is it's blending in my purple and my brown into a single unidentifiable color that is so delicious. It's neither brown nor purple. It's just an amazing, amazing, soft and friendly to the brain color, and it's also smoothing out the effect. The paper that I'm working on is a 60-pound drawing paper, and it's a little bit textured. It's designed for drawing. It has texture. You can clearly see that our sketching so far, it looks a little bit grainy. So this blender pencil is taking out the grain quite a bit, making it a lot smoother. Now, by taking out the grain, I don't mean mush the surface of the paper. We're not actually messing with the texture, not at all. Never, ever mush the surface of the paper. It's just a horrible unprofessional habit, and it hurts me to see when people do it, or when people preach to do it on YouTube. It's just wrong. So don't do it. We never mush the texture of the paper. But we can hide it. We can hide that grainy effect by blending our colors with such pencils as this 20% French gray. And now we're going to come in with our black to increase the contrast and, of course, to enhance some of the shades of our darkest pools of this newly invented purplish brown color. There is a universal rule in portraiture that states that the darkest part of your composition needs to be the pupil, and the lightest part, that white highlight on your eye. There are very few universal rules in art. Art is very fluid, it's very organic, and there's lots of room for breaking rules and making up your own rules. That's why it's art and not a science. But there is some science to art. And one of the things that's universal is this rule of portraiture. Your truly pure black, your darkest black will be in the pupil, and your whitest white will be that highlight. And that is true to my sketch. The white of my eye is not as light as the highlight on the eyeball. That one little rule is what makes the eye look realistic and shiny and slimy. Now, obviously, if the highlight was over the part of the eye that happens to be the whites of the eye, then still it would be the lightest part. But what I mean is that surface, that texture, the whites of the eyes, shouldn't be the lightest part. The highlight itself, regardless of where it is on the eyeball or how many of them there are on the eyeball, the highlights will be pure white and the pupil will be pure black. That's not to say that you can't have other areas of your composition that are pure black. For instance, I have very dark areas on the eyelids, on the eyelashes, and that's perfectly fine. They can be black, they just can't be darker than the pupil. The pupil has to be the darkest part. And again, now that we're coming to the end of this drawing, please note that there are no strong, clean outlines anywhere here at all. They're all diffused. They're all just pools of light and dark. Even here, as I'm cleaning up the edges of the iris, yes, it's a very clean and even circle, very true to life, very realistic, but it's fuzzy. It's obviously fuzzing out into the center with the pigment, and even around the edges, it's not a perfect line, not like the kind of line that I would use in creating a coloring page. So that slight diffusion, that slight sfumato effect, is something that you want to look for in your freehand sketching. And why do we desire this effect so much? Because that's how our brain actually perceives reality. We don't see clean outlines, we see things a little bit fuzzy. What do we do when we create two-dimensional art? We mimic what the brain sees in reality. And that's it. I think it looks amazing. The purple and brown effect with a little bit of a blender and some black detail work is the way to go. I hope you try this effect. I hope you try it my way first before you go crazy and start inventing your own ways. Please make sure that you work on large scale. Notice right now the size difference between my drawing and my hand. That's the size of the eye that I want you to practice on. Remember to keep it under an hour. Don't spend hours on this one drawing. I would rather see multiple drawings than a single one that you spend the entire month on. Don't sweat the details. I would rather you focus on the shape and proportions, make sure that it's realistic, and on smooth application of shading to create this sfumato effect and not using outlines. Please post your work in the community and also share your thoughts and experiences so that other students can learn from your advice as well.